The COVID-19 pandemic is said to have jumped from animals to humans, starting with pangolins and bats in China. It would be easy to demonize some animals as dirty and transmitters of a disease that can be deadly to humans. But some scientists say they present an opportunity for better understanding how the SARS-CoV-2 virus works. COVID-19 began in animals. Could the answer to finding a vaccine for the coronavirus also lie in them?
That's the question. Welcome to your COVID-19 special here on DW News. I'm Monica Jones in Berlin. Good to have you with us. Now, we share the same planet, we breathe the same air and drink the same water, and often we are the best of friends, humans and animals. But now the pandemic overshadows our happy coexistence. All available evidence for COVID-19 suggests that SARS-CoV-2 is transmitted between animals and humans. Where do we go from here? In a moment, we ask an expert. But first, let's remind ourselves where this virus supposedly came from.
Bats. Their reputation has taken a battering lately. Since the outbreak of the novel coronavirus pandemic, some people are afraid of being infected by bats. Florian Glotzer-Rausch, head of the Noctalis Bat Center in the German town of Bad Segeberg, gets a lot of anxious queries. They found viruses related to the coronavirus in Chinese bats and said bats have the virus and have passed it to humans. But it's not that simple. There are intermediate hosts and we don't know their identity yet. Our native bats have nothing to do with it. The biologist warns against taking nest boxes down out of fear. Bats are vital for our ecosystem in areas like pest control. In 2007, together with the virologist Christian Drosten, Florian Glotzer-Rausch carried out a study on the bats in the Kalkberg caves in Bad Segeberg. They found coronavirus in the bats there, but a harmless variety. Bats have a very high natural diversity of coronaviruses. It's not just these SARS-like coronaviruses, but also a range of others too. And coronaviruses are not restricted to bats, they exist in many mammals. They even found the coronavirus in a beluga whale. And it's not just mammals, fish too. The Friedrich Loeffler Institute on the island of Reims is researching which animals carry the virus that is currently causing so much anxiety around the world. Their work takes place under high security. So far, cats, dogs and minks have become infected naturally. Just recently it happened in 2 mink farms in the Netherlands. There have also been experimental infections of ferrets. In hamsters and in rabbits, it's pretty bad. Ferrets are playing their part in developing a vaccine against the coronavirus. Farm animals like pigs have so far not become infected. They appear to be not susceptible to the virus. But even animals that have the coronavirus do not necessarily infect people, as some fear with pets, for example. All of the animals which have so far tested positive are associated with the SARS coronavirus 2 infection or a COVID-19 illness in people. That means we believe it was human-to-animal transmission. There is no epidemiological evidence anywhere in the world that animals, be they wild animals, farm animals or domestic pets, play any kind of epidemiological role in the spread of the pathogen. These animals are not identified as risk factors. The pandemic thrives on direct human-to-human transmission. Anyone who is sick with COVID-19 should avoid close contact with pets so as not to infect them. But which animal originally transmitted the virus to humans? Possible candidates are the raccoon dog, the pangolin, and the civet. But so far there are only indications, not firm evidence. Florian Glotzer-Rausch hopes that there will be certainty soon. Meanwhile, the Noctalis Bat Center has reopened and is planning an exhibition on bats and the virus to explain why no one has to be too afraid of the nocturnal creatures.
And we have someone here with us to explain a bit more, Professor Thomas Mettenleiter, who we just seen in this report. He, of course, is a virologist and the president of the Friedrich Loeffler Institute. That's the Federal Research Institute for Animal Health here in Germany. Good to have you with us. And you've been doing research on a COVID-19 vaccine using ferrets. What are your findings so far?
Yeah, hello from Insel Reims. We first of all had to establish the animal model. And for testing vaccines to be used in humans afterwards, the animal model needs to mimic the human situation as closely as possible. And we find in ferrets that they are susceptible, they replicate, they multiply the virus, they excrete it, and they can transmit it, but they don't get sick. So they are a model of the asymptomatic infections that still lead to infectious change, in contrast to, for example, hamsters that get sick. In our first series of experiments, we tested 3 different assays. One was, does an infection really lead to an immunity which is solid enough to prevent a second infection? And at least in the short run, we can say yes, that is the case. Mm-hmm. So ferrets that recovered from the first infection, they have a very solid immunity and they completely resist the second infection after 3 weeks. We tested an inactivated vaccine preparation, which didn't really work very well. And we have then tested one of the candidate vaccines, which is a vector vaccine, which has been developed by the Ludwig Maximilian University in Munich. I can't tell you about the final result yet, but there are some promising results already.
Sure,
available.
It's all still work in process, but it sounds very promising already. What's interesting, though, is, we saw this in the report as well, that pets such as cats, dogs, they can catch the virus. Livestock seems to be immune. What does this tell us about the virus and how it chooses its host?
Yeah, that's an interesting question where many scientists worldwide are actually chasing at. There's a lot of molecular modeling going on in trying to predict which animal species could be susceptible to the virus and which not. This is more or less a lock and key principle that is used by viruses to enter cells or enter organisms. But unfortunately, this doesn't really match that well. So, for example, for pigs, there was the idea that they would be infectable, susceptible to the virus. And if you really infect them in real life, they prove to be resistant. So I think for the time being, we still have to really validate this in vitro modeling data by infecting the real organism, and the results could be quite different.
Now, of course, especially now in times of a pandemic, when we talk about viruses, we talk about something bad, something we must fight. But we mustn't forget that viruses also play an important role for our ecosystem and certainly don't harm bats, as we've learned. Is there such a thing, such as a good virus and a bad virus?
Naming viruses good and bad is more, what they do to us as humans. So whether we have a direct or indirect harm, then we say they are bad. And if we don't feel anything, they might be good. Viruses are the most prevalent life form on this planet. They have the highest rate of biodiversity or genetic diversity that we know. And viruses are at the basis of life as we know it, or at least virus-like elements. And without viruses, we would actually not be here. They are the major drivers of nutrient turnover, for example, in the oceans. So for a virologist as myself, they are just fascinating, tiny living beings, as Friedrich Loeffler called them, and they are most fascinating organisms to study.
All right, well, Professor Mettenleiter, COVID-19, we've heard that many times now, isn't the first zoonosis. It probably isn't the last. What can we learn from this one?
It's definitely not the last. And in fact, all scientists have been saying there will be another pandemic. Unfortunately, we don't know where and when and which infectious agent would be involved. What we can learn from this one here is we will probably never be able to prevent spillover infections from animals to humans, because humans are biologically part of the animal kingdom. So this is just a continuum there. On the other hand, what we need to be alert on is the first infection chains that develop. So if the new agent that enters the human population learns to be transmitted efficiently from human to human, these are then local epidemics, and we need to find them and detect them as early as possible, and then also control the infection at this very early stage.
Right.
We can improve of that. I think our diagnostic procedures are specific and sensitive enough to detect these events, but we have to be on the alert.
Okay, Professor Mettenleiter, thank you so much for your time, and do stay healthy as always.
You're very welcome, and yourself as well.
Well, time for your questions now, and that means over to our science correspondent, Derek Williams.
What is the size of the coronavirus in microns?
With all of these large-scale animations of coronaviruses that I look at every day, sometimes it's hard to remember how tiny they actually are. To answer this question, let's first get the terms down. Micron is an old way to say micrometer, which is 1/1,000,000th of a meter. To put that maybe in terms that we can visualize, it takes 1,000 micrometers to make a single millimeter. Now, as small as that is, a virus is much smaller. It's down in what's called the nanometer range. 1,000 nanometers makes up a single micrometer. At around 125 nanometers in diameter, SARS-CoV-2 is actually a pretty large virus, at least among the viruses that infect humans. But it would still take 8 of them lined up to stretch a single micrometer or micron, if you prefer. Hair is always used to illustrate stuff like this. A human hair is around 50 microns across. So it would take around 400 coronaviruses end to end just to span the width of a human hair. Now, I triple-checked my math on this one, but it isn't really my strong suit. I hope I got it right. I'm sure that somebody will tell me if I didn't.